So, welcome to our 178th online gathering for faith leaders across the country. This regular gathering, called Courageous Leadership, is sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I am Jason O'Neill. I use any and all pronouns, and I am the operations manager for ELCA coaching and one of your facilitators today. In attunement with the truth and healing movement of the ELCA and moving toward right relationship with our Indigenous siblings and neighbors, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. We are gathered today from all parts of Turtle Island, also referred to as North America, and we are connected together by technology, by faith, by a common sense of purpose, and by the breath given us by the breath maker who has named and called us here, as well as by the very piece of Mother Earth, the land that each of us inhabits today. We understand the importance and necessity of acknowledging the land and the original Indigenous peoples whose creation stories are rooted in these places and who have lived on and still live on these lands throughout Turtle Island since time immemorial. That word gets me every time. We also understand that all land is Indigenous land, and we invite each of you to name in the chat the Indigenous peoples or tribal nations who were the first to love, pray, grow, celebrate, cry, drum, and sing upon the lands and places where you are located now. We know that Indigenous peoples are not historical subjects, but part of our communities, churches, schools, and leadership, and that they offer invaluable wisdom for how we exist today and into the future in relationship with Mother Earth, as well as our human and non-human neighbors. If you are Indigenous, we invite you to name your people or tribal nation in the chat now so that we may see you more fully in this online space. Thank you all. We understand the importance and necessity of acknowledging the land and its original Indigenous peoples, and doing so consistently whenever and wherever we might gather, online and in person. Also, we understand that this protocol is only a first step, and that as we venture into the world, we must learn more, do more, and realize healing and justice for the Indigenous peoples whose lands we now occupy. So let us begin this work by entering into a place of peace and listening together. Through these gatherings, we have developed a covenant of how we enter and interact in this space. We are committed to creating a safer and braver space in these gatherings where we are able to bring the truth of who we are and how we are doing. And with all of this said, we proclaim these conversations are meant to be an intentional step to live more fully into God's dream for us as the body of Christ. So, in preparation for our topic today, I would like to invite us to spend a few minutes in scripture and with the January 28th post by Cole Arthur Riley, author of Black Liturgies. So, I'm going to share my screen. And I want to be able to see y'all. So, give me 1 second to click on that, maybe. All right, thank you. So I will read each slide aloud and then allow for silent reflection after each one. So from Matthew 19, then children were being brought to him in order that he might lay his hands on them and pray. The disciples spoke sternly to those who brought them, but Jesus said, let the children come to me and do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of heaven belongs. From James Baldwin, it is astonishing the lengths to which a person or a people will go in order to avoid a truthful mirror. And from Audre Lorde, the true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations which we seek to escape, but that piece of the oppressor which is planted deep within each of us. And from Cole Arthur Riley herself, as we come awake to the interconnected oppression in the world, we must confront the parts of ourselves that are in a hidden alliance with the systems that seek to destroy us. And then, as she does, a couple breathing exercises I'm going to invite you into. So, if you would like to inhale together, I examine my interior, and exhale, I claim more for my soul. Maybe one more time. I examine my interior, I claim more for my soul. And one more. I inhale, I pay attention, and exhale, the revolution is within. Inhale, I pay attention, and exhale, the revolution is within. May it be so. I am honored and excited to introduce Janelle Scales today, a consultant, organizer, activist, storyteller, writer, and maybe her most important role of mom. She has been educating children and adults for over a decade on social justice topics such as racism, sexism, transphobia, and ableism. She has worked with people across the nation leading anti bias education workshops, DEI trainings, and offering private consulting. Her personal conviction and commitment to social justice resonates, convicts, and inspires audiences to engage in self reflection and community action. Janelle, welcome to our space today.
Thanks for having me. Um, you might hear my children during this time, which honestly is nice for me. Their sounds offer me a bit of comfort and grounding. So if you hear them, just listen. You might hear something funny or ridiculous. Um, a few years ago, when my kids were about 10 and 12, I asked them how the biases of adults impact their treatment. And quickly, I mean, without thought, they said they don't respect us and they don't listen to us. And immediately I thought about how that feels as a Black person, as a woman, as a marginalized gender, as a chronically ill person, and how we're not listened to and we're not respected, even within our own communities, because, like the Audre Lorde quote said, like, those oppressors live inside of us. So even in a room full of women, if I'm in a room full of women, I'm less likely to be heard and seen and believed. There's a bias that creeps up because we have been conditioned in our own biases. This is the air that we breathe. That's what I like to describe it as. It's the air that we breathe. And when I think about children, and the biases that we hold against them as adults, I think about that as sort of the foundation for all of the other biases that we have in community and how all of those biases impact our connection with each other. If we think about it, children are the only humans in this country that are not protected by the law from assault. They're the only kinds of people that you can hit and not be charged. Um, in 23 states, which is almost half of our country, you are allowed to hit children in school. And to put that in greater context, children are mandated to go to school in this country. So you are allowed to hit them in places that they are mandated to go. You cannot hit an elder. You cannot hit your spouse. You cannot hit a stranger on the street, but you can legally hit a child. What are some other ways that children are not protected or valued? And that's sort of the baseline, right? Like at the very basic level of human protection, they are denied that one thing of being legally protected from physical assault. And we call it domestic violence for every other kind of person, but for them, we call it discipline. And children, and many of us, all of us were children, which is kind of bizarre. And that shows you how deeply indoctrination and socialization impacts us, is that even though we all shared this marginalization at one time, we are quickly trying to, and we quickly turn to being oppressive. And part of the reason when you hear children say, I can't wait to grow up, I can't wait to grow up, it is not because they want to pay bills and get jobs. And we go, wait, you have your whole life to work. You know, we minimize that expression. But the real meaning under that is I want autonomy and respect. And that is something that I'll only get as an adult. Children in this country work and pay taxes, and they have no voting privileges. Um, Children are most impacted by poverty, by food insecurity. They are the quote unquote casualties of the wars that adults wage. And this kind of culture impacts our relationships with them, even if we're not explicitly violent towards them. We all tolerate pretty easily the abuse of children. We sleep fine at night. We're not in the streets advocating for their rights. And they are a collective group who don't really have agency and advocacy in the government. They are completely reliant, nearly, on us to advocate for them and to care for their needs. The people who harm children the most are their parents, generally. In this country, the people who kill children the most are often their parents. And then we have a lot of audacity as adults. We say things like, oh, this generation, they don't listen, they're disrespectful, they're flagrant, and we continue to build a society in which they are devalued. Like my daughter said, we don't respect them and we don't listen to them, and yet we feel entitled to their respect in their ears. And if they don't, we're offended. We're calling them disrespectful. We label them as rebellious when they turn into teenagers. And in any other context, what is a rebel? As someone who is rebelling against an oppressive system. But when we think about teenagers and children doing that, it's a negative connotation. We call violent people, abusive, apathetic people, childish, toddlers. Toddlers are some of the most adorable people on the planet. And yet we use their names as insults to each other, to our presidents that we don't like. And it's common. And we speak this language around them all the time. They're constantly bombarded with messages that somehow being a child is inherently wrong. And before colonization, and in many parts of the world, children were looked at as the people closest to the divine, closest to the spiritual world. The Lakota word for children is translated to sacred little beings, sacred little ones. And I grew up hearing children were born in sin and shapen in iniquity. And the rod of correction drives it out. And I wonder the impact that that has on me now. I know that it taught me very early on to dehumanize children, even when I was a child. When I was a child, I thought it was completely appropriate for children to be hit by their parents. I thought children who weren't hit by their parents were somehow spoiled, or I don't know. Those children weren't good children. And we've internalized our own oppression so much as adults. We say things like, I got spanked and I turned out fine. And I wonder how that would sound in another context. Like, my partner hits me and it's for my good. That's how I learn to be better in relationship, to be better in community. If someone talked like that as an adult about their lover, someone very deeply close to them, most of us would find that uncomfortable. We would be like, therapy, support. But if an adult says that about how their parents treated them, we don't find that as uncomfortable. And I would like us to think about how all of these these are structural laws, institutions, impact the way that we treat people as coaches, as leaders, as community members. How does that impact how we see them or how we don't see them? And then how does that impact how we see ourselves? Oftentimes, when you can justify the abuse of one individual, you can justify the abuse of any, and you are much more likely to justify the abuse that you experience as well. And I think in this country, where there are plenty of countries where it is absolutely illegal to hit children. I posted something one time about um, children being hit, and a person from another country was like, wait a minute, I'm so confused. You all hit children in the US? It blew their minds that that was a common practice. And it is so common that we don't even flinch at it. We happily send our children to schools where they can be assaulted. What kind of environment are we creating? What kind of future are we thinking about? If this is our standard for our little sacred beings, for the people who are most vulnerable, what what kind of society does that create? When I first started talking about um, the rights of children, I got so much hate. I had to block people. I mean, my page was getting harassed. It was awful. And mostly it was because people were so uncomfortable with having to think about their parents who they love and care for as also people who harm them and people who abuse them. And so instead of confronting that reality, they made me the abuser. They made me the person who was responsible for their discomfort. So, in this moment, I'd like for you all to reflect on some of the things that I've discussed. I hope that it made you a little uncomfortable. I do. I think that discomfort is our only means of growth, mostly, especially at this adult age. Children can grow without being really uncomfortable. You present them with information and they go, oh, well, that makes sense. And they move right along. You present us with information, we go, oh, no, no, that's not what I was taught for the last 20, 30, 40 years. No, no, no. Let me figure out how to do some gymnastics in my brain to prove you wrong. So for adults, I do hope that I make you a little uncomfortable or I've made you uncomfortable in some way in propelling you towards growth. So in this time when you're talking and discussing with each other, I'd like for you to reflect on the society that we have created, on the ways that our bias against children, our most sacred and vulnerable people, has impacted the structures, the systems, the laws, even the institutions that you all belong to and you work in, even your interpersonal relationships, perhaps your relationships with your own children or the relationship that you have with your own parents. And I'd like for us to imagine what a different society would look like. And even to reflect on what made you uncomfortable about this and why. I'd like to also say this, that children are the most marginalized group because within the marginalization of children, there are other groups too, right? There are Black children, there are Black marginalized genders, there are Black disabled children, there are Indigenous marginalized genders. And the impacts of systemic racism and ableism and sexism and queer phobia impact them most severely. That is why many of our trans little siblings do not make it to adulthood because we make a society intolerable for them. And that's really what I have for you right now. I'm excited for you all to come back and to hear what you have to say. And thank you for sharing this space and time with me. Yeah, I'm Janelle Scales. I'm Nellie Scales on social media somewhere on, I think on Instagram. But I talk about bias. I come to groups like this, not usually religious groups, I'll be honest. But, corporations, organizations, schools, and I help people unlearn bias.
Thank you, Janelle. We'll share Janelle's information with the recording from today too, just so folks have that. So let's go into breakout rooms for a little bit. We'll bring you back about 10 minutes before the hour. Thank you, Janelle, for some challenges. We actually love that in this space. Yeah, we can wrestle a little bit together. All right, see you back shortly. Welcome back. And we noticed probably Janelle popping in a couple of rooms. Just wanted to, yeah, be a fly on the wall. Um, so what did you wrestle with together? What did you notice? Who's brave enough to share?
I will. Um, so one of the things that we talked about, well, first of all, I appreciate your presentation. I thank you for that. And one of the things I can say is a positive for me is bringing awareness. Sometimes, again, I have shared, I do what I experience in my life. And if I'm not aware of something, I will not do it any differently. So thank you for bringing awareness. I think that's what we need to do. I would encourage that to share the bring the awareness of all of the things. If you didn't say, well, there is it's not illegal to hit a kid. I wouldn't know that, right? Because you would think that would be something that will be illegal to do, right? Or yeah. So you got my drift. One of the challenge, especially as foreigners, is how does this apply to different tradition or context? I know when I was growing up, discipline is don't spare the rod and spoil the child. That's what I was taught, and for me, it worked, right? But we are living in a different context, if you will, or tradition. So I'm just struggling with the understanding of how does this apply to different tradition, if you will, would be one of the challenge. And one more challenge I have is what's the fine line between the discipline spanking, if you will, versus non-spanking? Because I know there are many ways you can discipline without spanking.
You all are often Bible believers, and discipline means to teach. And no one learns best when they are afraid. And hitting someone causes fear. Whether you call it spanking, pop, pop. If you say, I pop, pop my wife, I give my wife a pow, pow, it would register as hit. But when we say it about children, we go lesson. But our brains developmentally do not function the best when we are afraid. And if someone bigger than you, larger than you, is threatening you with violence, if that is the baseline of what you are living in, then you are not functioning at the highest capability. And is that not what we want for our children, for our loved ones? For them to feel so safe that learning and growing is super accessible to them. And I'm Black American. I was going to ask where you were from. Are you Bayesian? Are you, are you?
No, I jokingly tell people I'm from planet Earth because I'm a registered alien.
Okay. I
I'm just
just,
kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm from Guyana, South America.
oh, Guyana. Okay. My stepfather is from Barbados and your accents are similar. Yeah. Um, but I think that as a Black American, that is something that I grew up too with, that you hit, that's how you learn. But when I did a deeper dive, I really learned that um, ancestrally in Africa, those were not how parents were raising their children. That's something that we learned here through enslavement. But there's not a lot of research and documentation that shows that that's how children were being raised on the continent and in any other indigenous land. So now we've like, oh, that's how I learned. But what if there was a way to learn differently and better? And I ask people this question: if you could love and nurture and teach your child everything in life they needed to know without ever hitting them, would you try it? Would it be worth it to you to try it?
Thank you, Mikesh. Thank you, Janelle. Anyone else?
I didn't share this in my group, but I'm actually at the Synod office right now. And right before I came in to go to this Zoom, one of the staff persons said she this weekend was talking to at a church, and this guy, older guy, said, "How does a curmudgeonly guy like me relate to our youth?" And another staff member who actually works in a youth group said, "You know, be interested in them, ask them questions, see them as a human, and be, what is it like being a kid these days? What's hard, you know?" And I think that's the seeing the humanity in each other and being curious rather than wanting to tell somebody something, but wanting to learn. I like that.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. That's that coaching lens.
I love that. I wanted to offer a bit of a challenge. Many of us, especially I would say marginalized genders, and probably all of us in our lives have been in a space before where we've been put against the wall. Maybe we're being bullied, maybe we're being oppressed. And maybe after the bullying happens, you go and your friends or your teacher or someone says, "Oh my gosh, I saw what happened to you. That was so wrong." And I think that that's validating in a sense. But I think that what would feel better is if they stood with you
Mm.
in that moment. If in that moment they said, "Hey, that's not okay," or "I don't really like the way you're treating this person." And I think in a lot of ways, we have opportunities to do this within our own families and our own communities. And I think that's where it can start. It is hard to challenge your family members who are adults about how they parent and things like that. But having a lot of research, having documentation helps you. But who is going to advocate for children except for the adults in their community? It takes all of us to push change, and it is risky and it is uncomfortable. But any of our liberation has come at the sacrifice of people who came before us, who are willing to make their community members uncomfortable, who are willing to be outcasted. And what kind of courage can you practice to save children from harm? Who can you be in your community to be a voice for them?
Thank you so much, Janelle.
Thank
As you continue with your day and week, please remember that you are seen, you are valued, and you are loved.
Thank you.